Good morning, you're watching A News. I'm Dilek Tuna. Here are the headlines for the hour. The White House says the US troops will not be sent to the battlefield in Ukraine as a part of security guarantees. European Council President pushes for faster Ukraine accession and stronger EU voice in negotiations. Tel Aviv and Hamas consider a ceasefire proposal while the humanitarian situation in Gaza remains difficult. Fresh diplomatic activity has raised hopes for movement on the Ukraine conflict, but the key players remain far apart. Washington's security pledges, Europe's role on the ground, and Moscow's cautious approach continue to define the uncertain path toward peace talks.
The White House says President Donald Trump is committed to helping coordinate security guarantees for Ukraine, but US troops will not be sent to the battlefield. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said Washington could provide support in other ways, including military assistance to Europe and possible air operations.
The president has definitively stated U.S. boots will not be on the ground in Ukraine, but we can certainly help in the coordination and perhaps provide other means of security guarantees to our European allies. The president understands security guarantees are crucially important to ensure a lasting peace, and he has directed his national security team to coordinate with our friends in Europe and also to continue to cooperate and discuss these matters with Ukraine and Russia as well.
Trump's remarks come after a week of high-level talks. He recently met Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska and then hosted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky alongside 7 European leaders at the White House. Trump admitted the conflict is a tough one to solve and says it remains unclear whether the Russian leader is actually interested in peace. The Kremlin has played down talk of an imminent Putin-Zelensky summit. While Putin told Trump he was open to direct talks, he also proposed the idea of Zelensky traveling to Moscow, something Kiev is unlikely to accept. The following day, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov diluted the message, saying any meeting would need to be prepared step by step, starting with expert-level discussions before moving toward higher-level talks. In a televised interview, he also claimed that territorial changes are often part of conflict resolution.
I would like to emphasize once again that we have never talked about the need to seize any territories. Neither Crimea, nor Donbass, nor Novorossiya as territories have ever been our goal. Our goal was to protect Russian people who lived on these lands for centuries, discovered these lands and shed blood for them. They founded cities in Crimea and in Donbass, such as Odessa, Nikolaev, many others, ports, factories, plants.
Lavrov said Russia does not reject either bilateral or trilateral negotiations with Ukraine. Meanwhile, Switzerland says it would be ready to host Putin for any peace talks, despite an existing arrest warrant for him from the International Criminal Court.
European Council President Antonio Costa says Ukraine's EU membership bid must advance. Speaking after briefing EU leaders on the Washington summit, Costa called the prospect of a possible meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin enormous progress. He also welcomed US readiness to join security guarantees for Ukraine, calling it a very important step. Costa stressed that Europe must be part of future peace talks and confirmed the bloc is preparing a new round of sanctions against Russia. Previously, we spoke with Maria Dmitriev-Kapeniak, president of the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America from Illinois Division. Maria shared her insights from the recent meeting and gave us her perspective on what the mood is inside of the Ukrainian community.
We have been communicating with members of the Ukrainian delegation, and they are very optimistic, and they're calling it a great success, which is gives us hope. And we are hoping for the peace because, as you know, no one wants peace more than Ukrainians, especially in Ukraine, but here abroad as well. As much as we were frustrated and disheartened by the meeting on Friday, by so-called summit that took place in Alaska, there was also hope in that for us because we saw the backlash in the American society against the meeting with Putin. And it's not just Ukrainian diaspora. Americans of different descent, Americans have been outraged by that meeting, by hosting someone that is well-known war criminal on the U.S. soil. So a lot of organizations reached out to us expressing their outrage. And again, those are not Ukrainians, those are Americans. So I'm sure you've seen a protest in Alaska, and 80% of those protesters were actually American, and Alaska is very sparsely populated. So it's not just public outrage, it's a media outrage, it's outrage among politicians as well. The way how Russian president, who is the condemned war criminal, is being treated. So that gave us hope that society, American public, and I'm sure European public is outraged that Putin cannot win this war. And I'm sure that what really united European leaders and brought them to United States, seeing what it could end up with.
Over in Israel, tensions remain high as Tel Aviv and Hamas consider a ceasefire proposal while the humanitarian situation worsens. Gazans are divided, with some hopeful the truce could bring relief and others doubting it will be approved.
Israel says it's reviewing Hamas's response to a proposal for a 60-day ceasefire and the release of half the hostages still held in Gaza. However, some officials say that all Israeli captives must be freed for the war to end. The plan, brokered by Egypt and Qatar and accepted by Hamas on Monday, calls for the release of 10 living and 18 deceased hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. It also envisions a partial Israeli withdrawal, expanded humanitarian, and what Qatar described as a pathway to a comprehensive agreement to end the war. Israel estimates that only 20 of the 50 remaining hostages are still alive. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to convene discussions in the coming days, with a response anticipated soon. He also faces pressure from far-right coalition partners who oppose a truce, insisting the war continue until Hamas is defeated. On the ground, displaced residents in Khan Yunis expressed mixed views. Some doubtful Israel will agree, others hopeful it could ease conditions.
I expect every time the occupation would be obstinate, reject and receive proposals with negative responses, I expect the same for this proposal as well.
I expect, God willing, 80 to 90% that it will be positive, but I don't think it will end the war because he has other goals, which is to complete the destruction of Gaza.
Hamas says the proposal could open the door to broader negotiations. Israel, however, maintains that major gaps remain over security and political terms.
Over to northern Spain, as the country is facing its worst wildfire season in decades, as blazes continue to devastate the northern regions, forcing mass evacuations of people from their homes, leaving thousands displaced. Firefighters are struggling to contain the flames due to extreme heat and strong winds.
Wildfires continue to tear through northern Spain in what officials say is the country's worst fire season in more than 3 decades. In Galicia's Orense province, firefighters, including Spain's military emergency units, battled massive blazes overnight in the towns of Buses, Oimbra and Gondolfes, as thick smoke spread across forested hills. So far this year, fires have destroyed an area of land as large as 300,000 hectares, the highest on record and more than 4 times the average of recent decades. Fires remain active at 23 locations across Spain and at Extremadura. At least 4 people have died. More than 31,000 residents have evacuated from areas, and thousands remain displaced. Authorities have opened 92 investigations and have detained 31 suspects. Authorities are pledging support for affected communities, but with temperatures rising to 44 degrees and strong winds fueling the flames, officials warn containment could still take several more days.
Staying with those wildfires in northern Spain, the week-long blazes have scorched 38,000 hectares since Monday. That's more than the whole of last year.
Entire families and whole generations have been left devastated in northern Spain after wildfires destroyed their homes and left them in ruins. In one small village, 76-year-old Docinda Justo stands amid the ashes of her barn with no hope to the future.
I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. My children don't have a home. I don't have enough to recover what I lost. I don't have it. 2 neighbours pushed the door and opened it. The animals that were still alive darted out running, but some remained inside, charred. Sheep, goats, pigs, hens.
Meanwhile, her sons, Jose Antonio and his brother, lost their homes while narrowly saving their mother's house by soaking its walls with water.
My brother and I carried the house on our shoulders. We went to my mum's house and mine to douse the water. We saved my mother's house and all of this. You can see everything stayed like this. That's what it is.
The fires have spread over the regions of Extremadura, Galicia and Castile and Leon, forcing authorities to suspend rail services and cut access to roads in the area.
In the blink of an eye, everything turned into ashes. All of my grandparents' efforts. My grandparents built the house, my mother grew up in there and raised 5 sons in there. I am the eldest son, and well.
Wildfires have left widespread destruction in Flores, where many residents lost ancestral homes passed down through generations.
Memories of my mother, photographs, things I'll never recover. They cannot be recovered. The house and things. We'll have to carry on. It can be done. But the memories. I was raised here. Nothing can erase that.
Data on Tuesday from the European Forest Fire Information System showed the fires have burned 38,000 hectares of vegetation since Monday. That's just below 42,000 hectares during the whole of last year. Data on Tuesday from the European Forest Fire Information System showed the fires have burned 38,000 hectares of vegetation since Monday. That's just below 42,000 hectares during the whole of last year.
The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development has provided $150 million to support green energy and reconstruction in Turkey's earthquake-hit southeast. Our correspondent Aliya Aziz brings us the details.
The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is stepping up its support for Turkey's recovery and green transition. The EBRD confirmed a $150 million loan to Enerjisa Energy for projects in the Taurus region, an area devastated by the February 2023 earthquakes that killed more than 50,000 people and destroyed critical infrastructure. The financing will help rebuild the electricity network while also funding the construction of new solar power plants. These investments are part of Turkey's broader green energy agenda, which aims to reduce carbon emissions, prevent energy losses, and expand renewable power generation. Turkey has increased renewable capacity, aiming for 65% of electricity from renewables by 2035. Solar and wind projects are key, with plans for at least 3 gigawatts of new solar a year. The Enerjisa project supports this effort by providing sustainable power to businesses and boosting resilience in a heavily affected region. This loan is part of the EBRD's €1.5 billion earthquake response package announced shortly after the disaster. Beyond infrastructure, the package also supports small businesses, credit lines for individuals, and partnerships to drive private sector recovery. EBRD's Vice President Matteo Patron said the rebuilding effort requires long-term commitment and trusted partnerships, calling reliable, sustainable power fundamental to human well-being and economic recovery. For Enerjisa, the loan reflects investor confidence in Turkey's energy transition. Its CFO, Philip Ulbrich, said the partnership with the EBRD strengthens the company's strategy for sustainable growth, even in a challenging environment. Since 2009, the EBRD has invested more than 22 billion euros in Turkey, making it one of the bank's largest portfolios worldwide. For A News, this is Aliya Aziz, Istanbul, Turkey.
Ukraine is in active negotiations with Azerbaijan for new natural gas supplies, according to Energy Minister Svetlana Hryynchuk. Talks also cover allowing non-residents to store gas in Ukraine's underground facilities and launching joint extraction projects under the Ukrainian-American Reconstruction Fund. Hryynchuk stressed that a new contract could be signed before the heating season. In late July, Naftogaz signed its first agreement with Sokar Energy Ukraine, with the test delivery of Azerbaijani gas now moving through the Trans-Balkan corridor. Naftogaz says the step is strategically vital for building long-term cooperation. The Uzatom agency hosted a Kazakh delegation in Tashkent on Monday to advance cooperation in the nuclear sector. The sides discussed seismic safety of nuclear plant sites, joint monitoring of radiation and environmental conditions, and mechanisms for emergency response. Uzbekistan highlighted progress on international nuclear safety commitments, while both countries stressed the potential of nuclear technologies in energy, medicine, agriculture and water treatment. The talks reaffirmed bilateral commitment to safe and sustainable nuclear development in Central Asia. Uzbekistan and the European Union are entering a new phase of cooperation. President Shavkat Mirziyoyev has announced that a key agreement is set to be signed soon, expanding economic and political ties. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimurzina has the details.
Uzbekistan is preparing to sign a major new agreement with the European Union aimed at taking their partnership to a higher level. President Shavkat Mirziyoyev announced this during an international forum in Tashkent. He said the agreement is expected to be signed within the next few months, marking a significant step forward in relations between Uzbekistan and the EU. So, what does this mean on the ground? The new deal will replace the old agreement from 1999 and will greatly expand opportunities for trade and investment. It will simplify customs procedures, speed up the movement of goods, and introduce stronger protections for intellectual property. This is expected to attract more foreign investment and boost Uzbekistan's economy. The agreement has been in the works for several years. Its text was finalized in July 2022, followed by legal reviews and translations into EU languages. In last November, President Mirziyoyev and European Council President Charles Michel discussed speeding up the signing. Also, earlier, the EU ambassador to Uzbekistan, Toivo Klar, said the agreement will not only strengthen economic and trade ties, but also deepen political relations. Speaking at the forum, President Mirziyoyev also highlighted the strategic role of Azerbaijan as a transport and energy bridge between Central Asia and Europe. He expressed gratitude to Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev for his active involvement in regional initiatives. Key projects include developing logistics and energy corridors, many passing through Azerbaijan. And according to Mirziyoyev, these initiatives will help restore Central Asia's status as a major trade and economic hub between Asia and Europe. This growing connectivity with neighboring countries complements Uzbekistan's expanding partnership with the European Union. Just to put this into perspective, the EU is one of Central Asia's biggest partners. It accounts for around a quarter of the region's trade, and over the last decade, the EU has provided nearly half of all foreign investment in Central Asia. From Almaty, Kazakhstan, Fariza Kalimurzina, A News.
Syria's food security is under its greatest strain in decades, after the worst drought in 36 years slashed wheat production by around 40%, squeezing the country's cash-strapped government. The failure of securing large-scale purchases threatens millions who depend on subsidised bread.
Syria is facing a potential food crisis after the worst drought in more than 3 decades, which has devastated wheat production. That's according to the United Nations, which says that this year's drought has cut national wheat output by about 40%. The UN is warning that around 3 million Syrians could soon face severe hunger. More than half of the population of 25 million is already food insecure. In the country's northeast, often called Syria's breadbasket, farmers like Abbas Othman from Kamishli have been left with no crop to collect.
This year we planted 6 hectares and we harvested nothing. The crops didn't grow, and even the shepherds didn't benefit from the land. We incurred huge losses, including farm wages, seeds and fertilizer. We lost all of these costs.
The shortage is a major challenge for Syria, which is trying to rebuild after the 14-year civil war. Wheat is Syria's most important crop, central to its subsidised bread programme, but the government has been slow to organise large-scale imports, according to experts. Officials say only around 373,000 tonnes have been bought from local farmers this season, half of last year's volume. The government still needs to import about 2.5 million tonnes.
Local production does not cover more than 2 to 3% of local demand, especially after a year of drought that hit Syria. Never in Syria's history has there been a year like this one, and therefore it can't be relied upon, especially since the main food in Syria is bread.
In May, President Donald Trump announced the lifting of US sanctions on Syria in an effort to support recovery. Yet despite this, Damascus faces delays in payments. Russia, once Syria's main supplier, has largely suspended deliveries since December, citing financial problems and uncertainty about the new government. Aid workers and traders warn that without urgent action and international support, Syria could see its worst food crisis in decades.
According to the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister for Economic Affairs, Afghanistan has now achieved 60% self-sufficiency in meeting the country's flour needs domestically. Officials say this marks a significant milestone for the nation's economy. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
As Afghanistan celebrates its 106th anniversary of independence from the British Empire, sustainability turns into one of the key priorities for the government. New figures show the country is producing more of its own food than ever before. Latest data suggest that domestic production of flour reached 3.5 million tons and are now being produced inside the country, while the demand amounts to around 6 million tons of flour each year. Officials say some 200 flour factories are active nationwide. Together, they produce about 1 million tons of flour annually, with the remainder coming from smaller local mills. The Deputy Prime Minister's office say these factories have attracted nearly $150 million in investment. Beyond boosting domestic production, the industry has also provided jobs. More than 2,500 Afghans are now in permanent employment at the flour factories across the country. Authorities say increasing self-sufficiency in key goods like flour reduces reliance on imports and strengthens food security, a priority as the country marks more than a century of independence. Officials add that continued investment in agriculture and food processing will be critical if Afghanistan is to further increase production and ensure long-term stability. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for A News.
These are the updates from Baku for now. Stay tuned to A News for more world news and have a great morning.